Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session. I'm excited to introduce our topic, BPCC-101, Introduction to Psychology. Today, we'll be focusing on Unit 9, Emotions. This presentation is part of the Bachelor of Arts with Honors in Psychology program, brought to you by Sapphire. In the next few minutes, we'll explore what emotions are, their significance, and how they influence our behavior. So, let's get started and delve into the fascinating world of emotions. Today, we're going to dive into the fascinating world of emotions, starting with what the term actually means. The word emotion comes from the Latin emover, which means to move or stir up. This gives us an idea that emotions are about how we feel motivated or stirred internally. Emotions are internal states that involve a mix of physiological arousal, thoughts, and expressive behaviors. So, when we experience an emotion, it's not just a feeling. There are physical reactions and outward expressions that go along with it. These emotional states influence many aspects of our lives, including our behavior, the decisions we make, and how we interact socially. For example, how we feel can change the way we approach others or the choices we consider. It's important to distinguish emotions from basic biological drives like hunger or thirst. While those drives are about survival needs, emotions are more about our psychological responses to situations. Take disgust, for instance. It can be so strong that it overrides even hunger, like when we refuse to eat spoiled food. According to Feist and Rosenberg in 2015, emotions are brief, intense changes in our consciousness and physiology that happen in response to meaningful situations. They're quick, powerful, and often linked to something significant happening around us. Some key features of emotions include changes in our experience, how we feel internally, along with physiological arousal, facial expressions, and how we interpret or appraise the situation cognitively. All of these components work together to shape our emotional responses. Let's explore how different psychologists define emotions. Jarig and Zimbardo in 2006 describe emotions as complex patterns that involve both bodily and mental changes. These include arousal, feelings, cognition, and behavior, all working together to create our emotional experience. Koslin and Rosenberg in 2013 see emotions as psychological states with 4 key components: subjective experience, which is how we personally feel; arousal, or the physiological activation; cognition, meaning our thoughts about the situation; and overt behavior, which is how we express these feelings outwardly. Feldman in 2015 emphasizes that feelings have both physiological and cognitive elements, and that they significantly influence how we behave. So, emotions aren't just internal, they shape our actions too. Misra in 2016 describes emotions as a state of being stirred up or aroused, both behaviorally and physiologically, during an emotional situation. In simple terms, when we feel emotions strongly, our body and mind respond together. What's common across all these views is the idea that emotions involve internal changes, like how we feel and think, and also lead to expressions and reactions to meaningful situations. This holistic understanding helps us see emotions as a complex interplay of mind and body, crucial for understanding human behavior and experience. Let's take a closer look at the different types of emotions, starting with the basic emotions. These are considered universal, natural, and biologically programmed reactions. They appear early in life and are recognized across all human cultures. What's fascinating is that they are not learned. Even infants and people born blind display these emotions in similar ways. Some key basic emotions include happiness, which we often associate with joy, satisfaction, or pleasure that comes from achieving a goal or experiencing something positive. Then there's sadness, which is a form of emotional pain caused by loss, disappointment, or feelings of helplessness. Anger is another fundamental emotion, a reaction to frustration, injustice, or threats, and it often comes with tension or even aggression. Fear serves as a survival mechanism. It's our response to danger or perceived threats, preparing us for fight or flight. Disgust is a strong aversion we feel towards unpleasant sights, smells, or moral actions, helping us avoid harmful situations. And finally, surprise is a sudden emotional reaction to something unexpected or novel, catching us off guard. Supporting these ideas, Charles Darwin suggested that these emotions are biologically inherited and serve important survival functions. Similarly, Paul Ekman's research showed that facial expressions of these emotions are recognized globally, regardless of cultural differences, which highlights their universality. For example, when we feel fear, our body gets physically ready, our heartbeat increases, priming us to respond. Happiness, on the other hand, plays a vital role in social bonding and cooperation, helping us connect with others. So, understanding these basic emotions helps us see how our innate responses shape our interactions and survival strategies across all cultures and ages. Let's talk about self-conscious emotions, which are a bit more complex than basic feelings. These emotions require us to be aware of ourselves and to evaluate our actions in relation to others or social standards. They tend to develop later in childhood, once we become capable of self-reflection and understanding how our behavior affects those around us. Some key self-conscious emotions include pride, guilt, shame, embarrassment, and humiliation. Pride is that satisfying feeling of accomplishment we get after success or recognition. Guilt, on the other hand, is that uncomfortable regret we feel when we've done something that goes against moral or social standards. Shame is a painful feeling of humiliation or worthlessness, often following a moral failure or social rejection. Embarrassment is usually milder. It's that awkward feeling we get when we make social mistakes or find ourselves in awkward situations. Humiliation is more intense. It's that deep sense of degradation or disrespect when someone else makes us feel small or unworthy. Now, these emotions are heavily influenced by our culture and social expectations. They play an important role in regulating our behavior and strengthening our social bonds. For example, feeling guilty can discourage us from repeating wrong actions, while pride can motivate us to achieve more and seek recognition. To give you a practical example, imagine a student who feels proud after receiving an award. That's a positive, self-conscious emotion reinforcing achievement. But if that same student cheats on an exam, they might feel guilty afterward. Or think about embarrassing situations, like forgetting lines during a speech. That mild discomfort is a normal response. And if that mistake affects their reputation, they might experience shame. So, understanding these emotions helps us see how they function socially and personally, guiding us to behave in ways that align with our values and social expectations. Now, let's look at the concept of complex or mixed emotions. These are emotions that don't come from a single basic feeling, but rather from a combination of them. They are influenced by our thinking, memory, and even our personality, which makes them very individual and context-dependent. For example, jealousy often involves a mix of anger, fear, and sadness, especially when we feel there's a loss or a threat to something we value deeply, like a relationship. Love, on the other hand, is a blend of joy, trust, attraction, and affection, which together create a rich, nuanced emotional experience. Similarly, anxiety combines fear and worry about uncertain or unpredictable outcomes, making it a complex emotional state. And relief is what we feel after overcoming a stressful or fearful situation. It's a sense of joy that comes from the removal of stress or danger. Understanding these complex emotions is important because they reflect a higher level of emotional intelligence. They show our ability to understand, manage, and balance our feelings. They also illustrate how human emotions evolve from simple instinctive reactions to more sophisticated, socially influenced responses. Recognizing and managing these complex emotions is a key part of emotional maturity and personal growth. Let's take a closer look at the components of the emotional process. First, we have cognitive appraisal, which is essentially how we interpret or evaluate a situation to find its personal meaning. It's the starting point for our emotional responses because emotions are often shaped by how we think about what's happening around us. For example, winning a prize might make us feel joy, while failing a test could lead to sadness. Interestingly, two people can experience very different emotions in response to the same event because of how they each appraise it. This is why emotions are so subjective. They depend heavily on our personal perception and interpretation. Now, moving on to subjective experience. This refers to how an emotion feels inside us, our personal feeling aspect. Even when two people are in the same situation, they might experience the emotion differently. For instance, one person might feel fear as tension or anxiety, while another might feel excitement. This internal feeling gives each emotion its unique psychological tone and is what makes our emotional experiences so individual and nuanced. Together, these components highlight how our thoughts and personal feelings shape our emotional lives. Now let's look at the components of the emotional process, starting with thought and action tendencies. Emotions significantly influence how we think and behave. For example, when someone feels anger, it might trigger aggressive or assertive actions. If we're afraid, it often leads us to avoid situations or proceed with caution. Happiness, on the other hand, tends to increase helpfulness and spark creativity. These tendencies are important because they help us respond appropriately to different situations in our environment. Moving on to the physiological component, every emotion causes changes in our body's systems, primarily through the autonomic nervous system. Common reactions include a faster heartbeat and quicker breathing, which prepare us to act. You might also notice sweating or trembling, pupil dilation, or hormonal shifts like the release of adrenaline. For instance, when we feel fear, our body prepares us for a fight or flight response. These physiological changes are crucial because they equip us to handle challenges effectively, aligning our physical state with our emotional experience. Now let's look at the components of the emotional process, starting with facial and behavioral expressions. Emotions are often outwardly shown through facial movements, gestures, tone of voice, and posture. These expressions can give others a clear idea of what we're feeling inside, even without us saying a word. For example, we tend to smile when we're happy, frown when we're angry, or cry when we're sad. What's fascinating is that these expressions are quite universal, a fact supported by researchers like Darwin and Ekman. They help us communicate and understand each other better in social situations without needing words. Moving on to emotional response or regulation, this is about how we manage and control our emotions in different contexts. We learn over time when it's appropriate to express certain feelings openly and when it's better to restrain them. For instance, suppressing anger when talking to a senior or controlling laughter during a serious meeting. This regulation is crucial because it impacts our mental well-being, our relationships, and how well we adapt socially. In essence, emotions are a coordinated process. It starts with appraisal, how we interpret a situation. Then, we experience the emotion itself, which triggers bodily changes. These changes lead to expressions, and finally, response regulation helps us manage or hide our emotional reactions as needed. All of these steps connect our mind, body, and behavior into a unified emotional response. Let's explore the concept of emotions. Emotions are typically short-term, intense, and very specific reactions we have to certain situations. They usually pop up in response to something we can identify, like feeling angry after being insulted or feeling happy when we receive praise. Emotions cause physical changes in our bodies, such as an increased heart rate or muscle tension, and they also influence our expressions, like smiling when we're happy or frowning when we're upset. Importantly, emotions are adaptive. They help us react quickly and appropriately to challenges or rewards, guiding our behavior in real time. Now, some key features to remember are that emotions tend to be short-lived but very powerful. They are directly linked to external events. Something happening outside of us triggers them. They involve three main changes: physiological, behavioral, and cognitive. And interestingly, emotions are universally expressed. Think of happiness, anger, or fear, no matter where people are from. So, understanding emotions helps us see how closely linked they are to our environment and how they serve an essential role in our survival and social interactions. Now, let's talk about emotions versus moods and feelings. Starting with mood, a mood is a more general and long-lasting emotional state. It really influences our overall mental tone. Unlike specific emotions, moods might not have a clear cause. For example, you might feel cheerful or irritable without knowing exactly why. Moods shape how we interpret daily events. When we're in a positive mood, we're more optimistic, and when we're in a negative mood, we tend to be more critical. They tend to be less intense than emotions, but can last much longer, sometimes for hours or even days. To clarify further, let's look at the differences in a table. Emotions are typically short-term, triggered by a specific event or stimulus, and tend to be quite intense. Moods, on the other hand, are long-term, often without a clear trigger, and are generally less intense but more persistent. The key point here is that, while emotions prompt immediate responses, think of feeling anger or joy in the moment, moods serve as a kind of background tone. They influence our thoughts and behaviors over a longer period. Recognizing this distinction helps us better understand how our emotional life functions and impacts our daily experiences. Now let's talk about feelings, which are a key part of understanding emotions. Feelings are our subjective, personal experience of emotions. They represent how we consciously interpret what we're experiencing emotionally. For example, if you feel fear, that might translate into feeling nervous or uneasy. While emotions often involve physical reactions and behaviors, like a racing heart or a trembling hand, feelings are purely mental or psychological. They help us become aware of our internal states and give us the ability to label them. You might say, "I feel sad," or "I feel proud," which makes our emotional experience more clear and manageable. An important point to remember is the distinction between emotions and feelings. Emotions are automatic and expressive. They happen quickly and often externally observable. Feelings, on the other hand, are personal and reflective. They're how we feel about feeling. This inner reflection allows us to process and interpret our emotional experiences more deeply, which ties into the overall understanding of how humans experience and manage their emotions. Now, let's look at the functions of emotions. First, emotions prepare us for action. They help us respond quickly to what's happening around us. For example, when we feel fear, our body gets ready to defend ourselves or to escape from danger. Similarly, anger primes us for confrontation. This quick response mechanism allows us to adapt effectively to changing situations and act appropriately. Next, emotions play a crucial role in shaping our future behavior. Think about how a child learns. If they touch something hot and feel fear, they're likely to avoid doing that again. Positive emotions, like happiness or pride, encourage us to repeat behaviors that bring rewards. Conversely, negative emotions, like shame or disgust, discourage us from harmful actions. These emotional experiences help guide us to make better choices over time. Finally, emotions are essential for regulating social interactions. They serve as a kind of nonverbal language. Our facial expressions, gestures, and tone of voice communicate our internal states to others. For instance, a smile usually shows warmth and friendliness, while anger signals disapproval. This emotional communication is vital for maintaining harmony and understanding in our social relationships. Overall, emotions are not just feelings. They are active tools that help us navigate the world and our interactions with others. Now, let's explore the functions of emotions, starting with how they motivate our behavior. Emotions serve as powerful driving forces behind what we do. For example, people are often motivated to seek pleasure and avoid pain, which influences many of our actions. Take love, for instance. It encourages us to care for others and build bonds. Similarly, guilt can motivate us to correct our wrongdoings. Moving on to the adaptive function of emotions, these feelings also have a crucial survival role. They help us adapt to our environment by alerting us to danger or harmful situations. Fear, for example, acts as a protective mechanism, warning us to stay away from threats. Disgust helps prevent us from exposure to harmful substances, which is vital for our health. In essence, emotions are not just feelings. They are essential biological tools that help us survive and thrive in our environment. They guide our actions and protect us from harm, making them fundamental to our overall well-being. Let's take a closer look at the James-Lange theory, proposed by William James and Carl Lange in the late 1800s. This is actually one of the earliest attempts to explain how emotions happen. The core idea here is that our bodily changes come first, and then our emotional experience follows once we interpret those physical responses. In simple terms, we don't tremble because we're afraid. Instead, we feel afraid because we tremble. So the process goes like this. An event occurs, which triggers physiological arousal, like increased heart rate or trembling, and then we interpret that arousal as a specific emotion, such as fear. For example, imagine you see a snake. Your heart might start pounding, and your body reacts physically. You then interpret this physical response as fear. The key insight from this theory is that emotions are closely tied to our awareness of bodily responses. Different bodily reactions can lead us to experience different emotions. However, there are some criticisms. Many emotions share similar physical responses, like both anger and fear can cause an increased heart rate, making it tricky to distinguish emotions solely based on bodily changes. This theory emphasizes the importance of physiological awareness in experiencing emotions, but it also highlights some limitations when it comes to differentiating between similar emotional states. Let's talk about the canon, Bard theory from 1927. This theory was proposed by Walter Cannon and Philip Bard as a critique of the earlier James Lange theory. They believed that emotions and physiological responses don't happen one after the other, but rather at the same time. In this model, the thalamus plays a central role by sending messages simultaneously to the cortex, which produces our emotional experience, and to the autonomic nervous system, which triggers physical arousal. So, when an event occurs, say you see a snake, the brain processes the emotion of fear and the physical reaction, like your heart racing, happen at the same moment. This highlights a key insight. Emotions and body responses are parallel processes controlled by the brain, emphasizing the importance of the brain, especially the thalamus, in experiencing emotions. However, it's worth noting that later research showed other brain areas, such as the amygdala, also significantly contribute to emotional responses, which adds complexity to this model. Let's talk about the Schachter, Singer or two-factor theory of emotion from 1962. This theory was proposed by Stanley Schachter and Jerome Singer. It suggests that our experience of emotion is actually a combination of two things: physiological arousal and cognitive interpretation, or mental labeling. What this means is that the same bodily state, like a racing heart, can actually be felt as different emotions, depending on how we interpret the situation. For example, if you see a snake and your heart races, you might label that as fear. But if you see someone you love and your heart races, you might interpret that as excitement. The process involves 3 steps. First, physiological arousal happens. Then, we give that arousal a cognitive label, meaning we interpret what it is. Finally, we experience the emotion based on that label. There was also an interesting experiment where participants given adrenaline felt either happy or angry, depending on the social context or others' behavior around them. This shows how much our context and thoughts influence what emotion we feel. The key takeaway here is that emotion equals arousal plus labeling. Our thoughts help us make sense of what our body is feeling, and that's what shapes our emotional experience. This theory highlights the important role of cognition in how we understand and experience emotions. Now, let's explore the opponent, process theory, developed by Solomon and Corbett in 1974. This theory suggests that every emotional experience triggers an opposite emotion, which helps us maintain emotional balance. Essentially, when we experience a strong emotion, like fear or excitement, our brain responds by activating an opposite emotion to keep things in check. For example, think about first-time skydivers. They often feel intense fear initially, but afterward, they experience relief and pleasure. Over repeated exposures, that initial fear tends to lessen, while the positive feelings, like excitement or relief, become more prominent. The key point here is that emotions tend to work in pairs: pleasure and pain, fear and relief, sadness and happiness. This pairing explains how we adapt emotionally over time and strive for a kind of balance, often called emotional homeostasis. It's a really fascinating way to understand why our feelings change and how we seek stability in our emotional lives. Let's take a closer look at the cognitive appraisal theory, proposed by Richard Lazarus in 1970. This theory really emphasizes the role of our thinking and interpretation when it comes to emotions. Essentially, it suggests that it's not just the event itself that triggers an emotional response, but how we evaluate or appraise that event. For example, if a student is called by the principal, one might feel anxious, expecting punishment, while another might feel proud, expecting a reward. It all depends on their perception of the situation. The process here is quite straightforward. First, we appraise or evaluate the situation, then this appraisal leads to an emotional response, which can be followed by a behavioral reaction. The key point to remember is that it's not the event itself that creates emotion, but how we think about it. This highlights the importance of cognitive control and reappraisal, meaning how we interpret and possibly change our perception of an event to better manage our emotions. Understanding this helps us see that we have some influence over our emotional experiences through our thoughts and attitudes. Let's explore the manifestation and expression of emotions. Emotions are not just internal feelings. They are also expressed outwardly through various ways like facial expressions, body movements, gestures, tone of voice, and behavior. These outward expressions are crucial because they help others understand what we're truly feeling inside. They form the foundation of social communication and empathy, allowing us to connect with others on a deeper level. For example, a warm smile often indicates friendliness and acceptance, while tears can express sadness. Clenched fists might signal anger. When we express emotions in these ways, it gives our feelings social meaning. This mutual understanding fosters cooperation, empathy, and emotional bonding among people. Now, moving on to the physiological side, emotions also trigger visible changes in our bodies. These responses are primarily controlled by the autonomic nervous system, which includes the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. You might notice your heart pounding faster or your blood pressure rising when you're scared or angry. Other common reactions include sweating, trembling, or pupil dilation. Sometimes, you may experience rapid breathing or shortness of breath. You might also notice a dry mouth or tense muscles. These physiological changes prepare our body to respond appropriately, whether that means fighting, fleeing, or calming down. So, emotions are not just mental states. They have clear, measurable effects on our bodies that help us react effectively to different situations. Let's talk about how we express emotions through facial expressions. Facial expressions are actually one of the most universal and easily recognizable ways we show what we're feeling. This idea is supported by researchers like Darwin and Ekman, who found that basic facial expressions are biologically inherited and are recognized across different cultures. For example, when someone is happy, they tend to smile and have bright eyes. If they're angry, you might notice a frown and tight lips. Fear shows up with widened eyes and an open mouth, while sadness often results in a drooping mouth and eyelids. What's interesting is that these facial expressions are usually spontaneous and automatic, which makes them reliable indicators of what someone is truly feeling. Now, moving on to body language and gestures. Emotions aren't only expressed through our face, but also through how we carry ourselves. Posture, movements, and gestures all communicate feelings. For instance, drooping shoulders can indicate sadness or exhaustion. Leaning forward often shows interest or excitement. Turning away might suggest rejection or discomfort. Body language adds important context, helping us interpret emotions more accurately beyond just facial cues. Together, facial expressions and body language give us a richer understanding of emotional states, which is really central to understanding human behavior. Now, let's talk about how emotions are expressed through our voice, which is known as vocal expression, including tone and speech. Emotions are often reflected in the way we speak. Their tone, pitch, and even the speed at which we talk can reveal a lot. For example, If someone's voice is trembling, it might indicate fear or nervousness. If the tone is loud and sharp, it could be a sign of anger. And a soft, slow tone might suggest sadness or a sense of calmness. These vocal cues are quite powerful because they help others sense what we're feeling even if they don't see our facial expressions. Now, moving on to cultural influences. While basic emotions like happiness, anger, or sadness are universal, the way we express them can vary significantly across cultures. Each society has what we call display rules, which are cultural norms about when, where, and how emotions should be expressed. For instance, in some Asian cultures, expressing anger openly in public is often discouraged to maintain harmony. On the other hand, in Western cultures, people are generally encouraged to openly show happiness and enthusiasm. These rules serve an important purpose. They help maintain social harmony and prevent conflicts. So, understanding these cultural differences is crucial because it reminds us that emotional expression isn't just about what we feel, but also about how and when we choose to show those feelings, depending on the cultural context. Let's talk about the manifestation and expression of emotions. When it comes to expressing our emotions, much of it is actually controlled by conscious regulation. That means we often adjust how we display our feelings based on social or situational demands. For example, you might smile politely even when you're upset, or control your anger during a disagreement. Effective emotion regulation is really important because it promotes mental stability, helps us maintain self-control, and supports healthy relationships. In fact, it's a key part of emotional intelligence, which is about understanding and managing our emotions and those of others. Beyond just facial expressions, emotions also influence our overall behavior. This includes things like our activity level, eye contact, and how quickly we react. For instance, when someone is excited, they tend to move around more, engage actively, and show enthusiasm. On the other hand, sadness might make someone less energetic and less motivated. Observing these behavioral indicators is really useful in many settings, whether in counseling, education, or everyday interactions. They give us valuable clues about a person's emotional state, helping us respond more effectively. So, understanding how emotions are expressed and how they influence behavior is crucial in understanding human psychology as a whole. Let's talk about the measurement of emotions. Emotions play a crucial role in shaping our thinking, behavior, and even our physical health. That's why understanding and measuring emotions is so important. It helps us better understand human responses and how to manage them effectively. Psychologists measure emotions to explore aspects like emotional intensity, how emotions are expressed, and their overall impact on performance and well-being. By doing this, they gain insights into how emotions influence our daily lives and long-term health. Since emotions involve both subjective experiences, what we feel, and bodily reactions, it's not always straightforward to assess them. That's why multiple methods are used to get an accurate picture. Combining different approaches ensures we capture the full complexity of emotional responses. So, in essence, measuring emotions isn't just about understanding feelings. It's about understanding people better, which ties back to our broader goal of studying human behavior and mental health throughout this course. Let's take a look at some major methods used to measure emotions, specifically the nonverbal and physiological approaches. These methods focus on observable bodily changes and facial expressions that are linked with emotional states. One of the key advantages here is that they tend to be more objective because they rely on physical data rather than self-reporting, which can sometimes be biased. For example, the facial action coding system, developed by Paul Ekman, is a well-known technique. It analyzes facial muscle movements, like smiles, frowns, or eyebrow raises, to identify specific emotions. This method is quite detailed and can give us insights into what someone might be feeling just by observing their face. Another common technique is the polygraph test, often called a lie detector. It measures physiological responses such as heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, and skin conductance. Changes in these responses can indicate emotional arousal, things like fear, anxiety, or guilt, though it's important to remember that these signals can sometimes be influenced by other factors. Then there are brain activity recording methods like EEG and fMRI. These tools help us see patterns of brain activity that are linked with certain emotions. They're especially useful in research and neuropsychological studies because they give us a window into the neural processes behind emotional experiences. Now, what are the advantages of these methods? As I mentioned, they provide objective, real-time data, which is incredibly helpful for understanding the physiological and neural aspects of emotion. They give us a more scientific way of studying feelings beyond just self-report. However, there are limitations too. These methods can't always tell us exactly which emotion a person is experiencing. They might indicate arousal or some physiological change, but not specify whether it's happiness, sadness, or anger. Plus, physiological responses can be influenced by other factors like stress or fatigue, which complicates interpretation. So, while these techniques are powerful tools in emotion research, it's important to consider their limitations and use them alongside other methods for a fuller understanding. Let's talk about the major methods used to measure emotions, starting with self-report or verbal methods. These rely on individuals describing their emotional experiences directly, often through questionnaires or rating scales. The idea is to capture the subjective, conscious feeling component of emotion, which is often what we're most interested in. One common tool is the PANASX, or the Positive and Negative Affect Schedule expanded form. This scale measures a wide range of emotional states, including feelings like joy, guilt, fear, excitement, pride, and serenity. It helps us understand the complexity of emotional experiences. Another method involves emotional rating scales or mood checklists, where individuals rate the intensity or frequency of specific emotions they experience. This provides a more quantitative measure of how often or how strongly someone feels certain emotions. Interviews and diaries also fall under this category. They give us a detailed, qualitative understanding of emotional patterns over time, helping us see how emotions fluctuate and what triggers them. Now, what are the advantages of these methods? They are generally simple and quick to administer, which makes them practical for many settings. Plus, they provide valuable insight into personal emotional experiences and allow us to measure specific emotions like happiness, anger, or sadness directly. However, there are limitations too. These methods can be biased. People might not remember their emotions accurately, or they might be influenced by social desirability, wanting to present themselves in a certain light. Also, some individuals may find it challenging to describe or label their emotions precisely, which can affect the accuracy of the data. So, while self-report methods are useful, we should always consider their potential biases and complement them with other approaches when possible. Let's talk about one of the major methods of measuring emotions, behavioral observation. This approach involves watching and recording emotional behaviors as they naturally occur. For example, you might observe someone's tone of voice, their gestures, or facial cues in real-world situations. It's a very practical method that is often used in clinical settings, in educational environments, and especially in child development. A good example would be observing how a child reacts during playtime to assess their emotional adjustment. This kind of observation helps us understand how people regulate and express their emotions in everyday life. It provides valuable insights that other methods might miss. Now, choosing the right method really depends on what you're trying to achieve and the context of your assessment. If you're doing research, you might lean more toward physiological tools like heart rate or brain activity. But in counseling or educational settings, self-reports or direct observation are more common and practical. And often, psychologists don't rely on just one method. They combine multiple approaches to get a more complete picture of a person's emotional profile. This integrated approach ensures that we understand emotions more thoroughly and accurately. Today, I want to wrap up our discussion with some key takeaways about emotions. Emotions are truly the essence of human life. They connect our body, mind, and behavior in a way that shapes how we experience the world and how we respond to it. When we talk about emotions, we're referring to feelings, arousal, expressions, and cognition. All of these elements work together to influence how we think and act. It's important to recognize that basic emotions like happiness and fear are universal. Everyone experiences these across different cultures and backgrounds. However, more complex emotions, which often involve thought and cultural influences, can vary quite a bit from person to person. There are major theories that help us understand emotions. These theories suggest that emotions are a blend of bodily responses, brain activity, and how we interpret or appraise what we're experiencing. This combination helps explain the rich and varied emotional landscape we all navigate. Emotions serve several vital functions. They prepare us for action, help guide our decisions, motivate our behaviors, and even strengthen our social bonds. They're not just reactions, they are active forces in our lives. We can measure emotions through different means. Physiological responses like heart rate, self-reports, and behavioral observations. These tools allow us to understand both how emotions are expressed and how they are experienced internally. Ultimately, emotions add depth, meaning, and direction to our human existence. As I like to say, emotions are not obstacles to reason. They are the energy that gives reason its purpose. They enrich our lives and help us find purpose and connection in everything we do. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the content today, please don't forget to give a thumbs up, like, and bell subscribe so you stay updated with more amazing videos from us. We really appreciate your support and engagement. Remember, our team, Skills Sapphire, is dedicated to bringing you valuable insights and quality content. Thanks again for being with us, and we look forward to sharing more with you in the future.